Welcome to another weekly QA here. I got three questions here today. They're all pretty interesting, and I think they're going to touch on again a number of things that a lot of people are sort of thinking about in some way, shape, or form. Just for a future note, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, throw them down in the comments below this video, and we'll look at addressing them for next week. So let's dive right into it. The first one here comes from Marta. And the question is, it seems a massive awakening has taken place. So what's your opinion on the best way for people to confront the fact that they've been lied to without completely lose their minds? How to stay sane when all things you believed were true are crumbling. So this sort of alludes to sort of the process that's going on within a lot of people, and I think has been going on for quite a number of years, and it sort of just seems to be intensifying right now, where we're learning about a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes in our societal world, the way our political structure functions, and some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes there, maybe the way our monetary system functions, maybe some of the levels of corruption that are going on. A lot of these things are starting to come to light, and people are starting to realize, oh my gosh, this might be worse than I thought. Sometimes people are going down rabbit holes that delves into stuff that's not true anyway, which sometimes can make them feel very unstable. But there are enough things that are absolutely true that can crash people's worldviews quite a bit. And in the process of crashing out our worldviews, which is really to say what we think about how the world functions and what's really going on, what starts to happen there psychologically is we start to actually go through an experience of, I no longer know what's true. I start to lose faith in my institutions. I'm no longer standing on solid ground. And so as people, why that can be very tricky is because we almost get into this moment where in some way, shape, or form, we may not have direction in things anymore. We might be going through sort of like a deep psychological deprogramming because we no longer know what to trust. And in that, we also look for certainty. We want to know, so what is true? What is absolutely true? What can I build solid ground on? Which is a very difficult process because in that, we can sometimes start to want to find certainty in things that are not certain. We want to find meaning sometimes in things that are not necessarily meaningful. So how I see this a lot of times happen in this space is you can sort of learn about certain things that are going on in the world, crash out your current worldview, and you no longer trust what government says or how things function or what corporations' real motivations are on any given global issue. And then all of a sudden you're going, okay, so if I now start listening to a particular alternative view, does it mean that that alternative view, which ties everything together in one web, does it mean that it's now correct? Because there is a deep sort of subconscious desperation that sometimes does come up to say, I'm very uncomfortable with this crashing out of my worldview that happened. So the first thing I come in contact with, sometimes I'm trying to make so certain. And what happens there is we start to get into this process where we're now believing in things that we may not know certain, like are certain. They may not have a lot of evidence behind them, but we're clinging to them. And what starts to happen there when we start talking about how people sometimes can lose their minds is I think minds get lost in first the crashing out of the worldviews, but then they can also get lost in the process of trying to fill our minds with whatever theories that we find. We try and fill our minds with those just to replace our old worldviews. And even if those theories don't necessarily line up with reality so much, we're going to start to then see that reality and the theories that we're trying to hold on to have a lot of conflicting points. And in not wanting to lose our worldview again, we start to almost deny the conflicts between what we've decided to replace as our worldview and how it may not actually fit into reality. It's a little bit of a complex and nuanced discussion that would probably be really good if we had a lot of back and forth to kind of really get clear on what this means in more of a specific sense, but I'll try and provide an example as to kind of what I'm trying to get at here is we might come to the conclusion, for example, that we can't trust the way politics is functioning with an election because it appears as though that elections are rigged in some way, shape, or form, or it appears as though that lobbying interests or powerful corporate interests behind the scenes suddenly are able to control what goes on in an election, so it doesn't matter. And a lot of that would be true. A lot of that would bear accuracy to what is actually going on in reality, is there's a lot of interests very evidently that impact what happens on a political policy level. So let's say we crash out that worldview and we no longer trust what governing institutions are doing. We then might go to a YouTube channel that is talking about, one small group of individuals that inherently control every single thing that's going on the planet. So this would be like looking at a cabal. And while I think there is truth to some of these things, I think it's a lot more complex, meaning I think that you can't find the cabal in every single action that takes place on a political level. So what ends up happening is people who want to hold on to that worldview as the answer for every single thing that happens, they start building stories around how to explain a current event through the lens of the cabal controls everything. And a lot of times it won't make sense. And a lot of times it will be paradoxical, or a lot of times it takes many, many leaps or assumptions to build that worldview. And what that starts to do is it creates almost an ideology in a particular sense that no longer can see where certain things are happening in our world that may not be under the agenda of a cabal, but it's just the human condition playing out. Human ideologies trying to grasp more control, or trying to make a business move to create more of a monopolized position or something like that in a particular space. So the sense here is that we're going from an absolute trust in a worldview to it crashing down, and then trying to build an absolute trust in another worldview, and sort of missing everything in between, which is kind of more what allows us to find common ground and connect and really get to the bottom of how so much of what's happening in our society that involves lies, or involves things that we've been deceived to believe, or illusions that we've chosen to accept about our society. So much of that is so complex and nuanced that trying to hold on to these strict ideological positions actually makes it really difficult to make sense of anything, and really difficult to have conversations and bring people to common ground to figure out how to move forward. So to sort of bring in the last piece of this puzzle, because I hope this is somewhat clear, because it is a little bit of a complicated question here, in the sense of that there's many details to it. We lose our minds when we crash out our worldviews, right? We lose our minds when we sometimes want to believe, go down a rabbit hole and believe every aspect of that rabbit hole without balanced inquiry, or without saying, for example, like, how can I test this new theory as aggressively as I'm testing, a theory that I used to believe in that I no longer believe? Am I applying the same level of rigor in my thinking to these new ideas as I was to old ideas that I was starting to question very deeply? And if we don't do that, which, in a lot of cases we don't, a lot of cases what happens is we just start believing whatever the new alternative view is pretty strongly, and we don't provide the same level of rigor in our questioning of it. We end up losing our minds in a lot of ways too, because we start delving into a difficult position where we're starting to believe in things very ideologically again, which closes us off. So how do you stay sane in this? How do you move through the fact that we are going through a very real experience where our trust in infrastructures, our trust in institutions are falling apart, and what we are waking up, right? In the CE protocol, we have the discussion of breaking the illusion, which is waking up more to the reality of what's going on, which is to say, seeing some of the corruption that does exist on levels we may not have realized before. It involves starting to wake up to a greater sense of who you are behind your thoughts or behind your ideologies, but really getting in touch with the essence or the spirituality or the spirit of who you are behind your mind, behind your thoughts. This can all be part of breaking the illusion of our materialistic reality. But in that process, sometimes going through a period where it feels like things are crumbling, where it feels like we're losing our minds, can be a necessary process. Now, that's not to say we just want to go off the handle, but it's to say that we need to be supported in community. We need to, be able to speak to one another to say, hey, I'm having trouble with some of the challenges that are coming to the surface here, and I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know what to trust anymore. And being able to move through this stuff as community is really important. So staying sane for me is really trying not to latch on to new ideas as absolutes, really allowing myself to be okay with uncertainty, to be okay with maybe not knowing something, really taking the time to build self-awareness, build more presence. We have a course in CETV that's designed for that. It's just literally about building a greater sense of self-awareness on a daily basis and a greater sense of presence on a daily basis. Those two tools will help you get to a more calm space within yourself, will help you see your thought patterns more, will help you see the fears that are arising in this crumbling world, in this lack of trust that we have in our institutions, and start to actually move through them and start to see what is it that I'm having a difficult time with, or what is really being challenged here that is bringing up fear. And in that space too, we also tend to attract more like minds or community that can support us and help us through this process. And that's one of the things that we're looking to bring to CETV very, very soon is we're doing some stuff behind the scenes right now to bring in almost like our own social media, like almost like a Facebook type situation, but not on Facebook and not on any of these other sort of platforms that other people control, but more so something where we know we can build something where we can come together in community and we can talk about the various shifts that need to take place in our perspectives, our worldviews, our self-awareness, and we can talk about a lot of the information that's coming forward that presents a new future for humanity that we can sort of create together. We want to create a platform that does that, and so we're looking to do that soon to our members area, which will provide some of the community that will help us feel sane through this process. But I guess the last thing I'll say with this, we also have another course inside CETV that is how to do a media detox, and sort of what that really is to say, how do we get away from consuming news and information so much for a short period of time that we can start to go within and look at our perceptions, look at our biases, look at our various sort of ideologies that we might have, and sort of just take a step back and see the bigger picture a little bit. Because if we stay so tight in on everything, when everything's crumbling, it can start to feel like our whole world is falling apart, as opposed to taking a step back and seeing why it's falling apart, seeing what role you play within that, seeing why it's important for you, how it's expanding your perception, how it can create a perfect time for questioning and reflections, right? Which is a very big part of the course. There's a lot of questioning and reflections that go on. But yeah, again, like we've always said over the last 11 and a half years we've been doing this, this is an inner journey as much as it is an outer journey. Meaning to understand what's going on out there is also to understand what's going on within ourselves, and to move through the personal transformation to prepare ourselves to move through creating a new reality. So I hope that answers that a little bit. Again, sometimes these are good conversations to kind of have back and forth, which we're looking into doing as well at some point, but it's kind of tricky right at the moment. So hopefully that suffice. As always, if there's anything more we can chat about, we can go in the comments here and go a little bit deeper. So this next question comes from Daniel, and it's a long one. So going back to the 2016 election, then candidate Trump's main message was to build the wall and make Mexico pay for it. During his bid for the presidency, and especially during his tenure in office, many walls were created as he sowed seeds of division through xenophobia, racism, sexism, bigotry, and apathy, resulting out of a blatant disregard for the feelings and opinions of those who oppose him and even his own supporters. Fast forward to 2020, and we are now seeing even more walls being erected everywhere, but these walls are in the form of plexiglass barriers, face shields, and face masks, with masks becoming mandatory in many parts of the world, and masks present a major physical barrier for normal communication, as well as psychological barrier when the mind becomes tricked into believing that other people are hosts before humans. With so many other pandemics and epidemics being sidelined because of COVID-19, my question is this: is our current level of consciousness making us pay for these walls, financially and or otherwise? And what might it take to knock them down for good and end these pandemics and restore a healthy planet? So this is a really well thought out question that talks about a lot of major collective themes that are playing out. Now, I know there's going to be a tendency for some viewers to perhaps look at some of the stuff that's mentioned in the earlier part of this question, where it talks about the Trump, the wall, and the sowing the seeds of the xenophobia and racism. I know that if you do look at certain things, you can say, well, hey, well, the media was very involved in taking some of what he said out of context and creating these whole stories, and then the media was sowing a lot of sexism and racism and whatever. We can look at it that way, and we can also look at it as Trump was very much a part of sowing a lot of this stuff too. What I think you're going to find, if you really take a step back and look at both aspects of this, is you're going to see that These are collective stories that were within our collective consciousness, whether we like it or not. I do think media did play a role. I do think Trump said a lot of things at times, not as many of the things that the media said, but he definitely has said things that do create divides and division. Because I do think that what Trump was and what our collective needed at the time was to really go through and bring up all of this stuff that's sort of sitting within our subconscious, both individually and collectively, and say, hey, let's bring it all up and let's face it and let's look at it. And because this is a lot of this stuff is based around how we see ourselves as humans, how we see ourselves as part of community, how we see ourselves in sense of comparing ourselves from male to female, from black to white or brown or whatever other colors we want to bring into all of these details are ways that we identify who we are. And when we bring them up, it gives us an opportunity to question, is this really who we are? And why do we put so much weight on this stuff? Why are we culturally coaxed into putting so much weight on me being different from you, being different from this, being different from that, on such a level? Yes, we are individuals. Yes, we have some different qualities to us that actually enrich our experience. But if we identify so heavily to material, so heavily to our skin color, so heavily to where we're from, so heavily to tradition and culture, right? Which are all just ideas that happen right here in the mind. If we identify so strongly to, in essence, just the material aspect of our world, which is just one small aspect of our world, there's an extreme non-material aspect to our world that is just sort of disregarded. But if we start to play within that, and we start to look at that, and we start to feel that, and we start to have a relationship with the non-material aspects of ourselves, which is that spirit, that observer behind the thoughts, right? The observer behind the ego, the observer behind the identities. And we start to get into that experience, and we start to align with, oh, this is as much a part of us as these other things. What happens is the weight that we put on all these other things, our gender, our color, our this, it starts to diminish. And we no longer see ourselves as that. We no longer identify solely as that. That's just one aspect of who we are. And when that starts to happen, you start to practice that, which is not hard, but takes some practice. You actually start to realize that so many of the differences that we aggressively try and see in people, or that we see, they start to not become as important. You see it. Oh, that is a person of a different color than my skin color. Okay. There's nothing there. And humanity is like nothing there that says like, oh, well, now I need to add this, and this, and this to them because that's what that means about them, right? That stuff starts to dissipate. And what's complicated about this type of conversation sometimes is that we are living in a world that has very much been built upon these things being so important. We're trying to find our way out of that. And our way out of that is to actually pull our consciousness out of only being aware of the material. So we're always like awake, for example, but what are we aware? So when we're awake, what are we aware of? And most of the time we're aware solely of our material, meaning what's going on in front of us, what we can perceive through our senses, right? And then what our perceptions are telling us. So if we're only kind of looking at, oh, solid objects, what I hear, what I see, what I sense, what I taste, what I'm going through, and then the perceptions that I build based on programming from that. And that's all we're aware of. And we don't expand our state of mind into non-locality, into who I truly am behind these ideas, into really paying attention to what the observer is saying behind the senses, behind the perceptions. The one that's able to observe all that. That's a deeper aspect of you. If I become more aware of that, I start to pull only my focus from that material to something deeper, to something greater. And in that, your whole worldview starts to shift. The way you connect with people starts to shift completely. It's now a different experience. What you see as so important in life starts to shift. But it's not something that I can sit here and tell you how you should think or how you should be. It's something that you experience. And when you experience it, it starts to happen for you, right? And this is kind of one of the differences in moving through a lot of this inner transformational journey versus, say, religion of our past, which is to say, this book here kind of tells you what your relationship with God is supposed to be like, what goes on in the world, how everything functions up in the heavens, and it's telling you what it is. Whereas through this experience, we commit to something on an experiential basis, right? Where we can actually come to a lot of our own understandings or conclusions of things through getting in touch with the deeper essence of who we truly are, or getting in touch with a whole other non-material aspect of who we are, right? There's lots of different ways to explain what that is. And so I don't want to get caught up in words here, like, oh, you didn't say that word quite right, or you didn't say that sentence quite right. That happens a lot in the spiritual space. Feel what's being spoken about more, as opposed to just the idea of, well, you didn't use the sentence right from the book that I read, or whatever it might be, right? So that sort of touches on a little bit of some of the collective stories that are going on that are coming up to our surface. And sort of the deeper question is, are we paying for these things now because they've been sowed in the past? Or are we, because we created this idea of walls, are we now paying, are we seeing almost like a karmic debt, maybe that's a way of looking at it, that now we're paying for? I tend to not necessarily look at things that much that way. I mean, we can. Like I said, there's a lot of very interesting sort of parallels that are brought up in this question that are fantastic. I just tend to look at it as, what is our current moment ultimately showing us, right? Which is to say, we got the masks, we got this. Yes, we very much create a world where we're losing connection, right? We very much create a world that is becoming more individualized, in the sense of, we are not community. We are sole individuals that are shutting ourselves off from one another and trying to just say, hey, how can I take care of me and myself, me and myself, me and myself, right? This is being pushed a lot. We're seeing the part where it talks about people are seeing them as hosts versus humans. This is the dehumanization, right? What so much is brought up in this question, which I think is important to look at, is the dehumanization process that happens all across the board. So dehumanization, as we've talked about a lot on this channel, we're not only seeing it where we're throwing out the masks and we're making it so that it's like, wow, this is a person's a host for a virus as opposed to a human being, and I'm seeing them as a danger versus a human being, right? First, they're a danger first, a human being second. Dehumanizing people as to potential dangers, dehumanizing, we're no longer seeing the connection, we're no longer having the nervous system connection that says, hey, your facial expressions communicate with my nervous system. Now we're taking that away. Now I'm just listening to you. Now your tone of voice communicates with my nervous system. But what I've noticed is that even people's tones of voice are starting to change in real life, where because we're not seeing each other, we're not sure what our facial reactions are telling us. Our tone of voice are becoming more monotone, right? Even greater disconnection. You may not have had that experience. I've been having that experience a little bit, where I'm seeing with people, things are becoming a little bit more monotone. This is, I think, we're sort of being cut off from deeper aspects of our nervous system that are very important to community and very important to connecting with one another. And like I said, I think a lot of what's going on here is about that loss of connection. We're seeing a height, right? We're going through the ending of a paradigm, if you will. And I look at it as an ending because I agree with what I'm observing, that I do think there is a mass large-scale change going on, right, on our planet on a deeper level. And not everybody sees this, not everybody accepts this, and that's okay. That's what I observe. It's what I feel is happening. A lot of things are coming to the surface for us to address, and in that addressing, you have an increased awareness, which can be an awakening, right? So we're increasing what we're aware of, not only about society, but about ourselves and our relationship with things. And that we can call an awakening if we want, right? So when we look at that, and we look at all these things that are coming to the surface, we're having the height of an old paradigm that says we're all disconnected. Not only in the reality of our systems, but in our psychology and in how we relate to one another. We're all disconnected. We're all just competing for a piece of the pie that's out there. And this is our story, and this is our journey, and this is what we're doing. And everything stems out of these types of ideologies and these types of ways of looking at things. And our old models of science are also built on this material. Everything is this, okay, we have something, it becomes a problem, we need to squash that problem and kill everything in its path, which we might be killing a lot of good things in its path, right? We might be disrupting nature. If there's a film on CETV that I made at the beginning of the year called Regenerate, Beyond the CO2 Narrative, which discusses how a lot of times we're looking at our environment from just the standpoint of CO2. And if we use that as our marker for saying, oh, well, hey, CO2 is the enemy, then we go after CO2, and we might squash so many aspects of nature in its path, right? We don't appreciate the interconnectedness and complexity of various beings that make up nature, like forests and so on and so forth, because we're looking at just the individual. How do we eliminate CO2? How do we eliminate, right? This is the type of thing where we're not looking at the interconnectedness of life. So we're going through, everything is separate, our old paradigm falling out, everything is separate, everything's not connected in a deep and meaningful way, to awakening to the reality that things are interconnected. Not just us as humans, not just us as other planets out there, part of one field, one source that creates individual, but yet it's still always connected. Then how all of that understanding, that whole worldview, starts to then play into society. This is the transition we're going within, right? We're starting to see a new paradigm emerging, and that new paradigm emerges through seeing the height of, I want to say, the height of the intensity of the old paradigm, which is like where we're seeing so much chaos, where we're seeing so much conflict, where we're seeing so much crumbling of these institutions, where we're seeing everything become so intense that we can't avoid it anymore. We can't just turn a blind eye to it. So a lot of times when people are like, well, don't focus on current events, just meditate on the mat. It's kind of like saying you don't want to address what is coming up for us to be addressed. These journeys go together. It's all one. It's all one thing. What's happening in our current events, and what's happening spirituality-wise, or what's happening within us as a personal transformation, it's one journey. There's no separation there. What happens in politics and what happens in our spirituality is one journey. There's no separation there, right? So this is all coming up for us to look at. And when we talk about things like financially, right? The question here near the end was bringing up financially, like, hey, we're starting to feel this financially. It's great, yeah, we do, because people on this planet, right? We take financial and we take money very, very seriously. So what is it going to take to wake people up to ask these questions, right? To expand their awareness, to say, are there different questions we need to ask? Go after the thing that we put a lot of stake in, right? And it's not to say that money and finances are evil and we need to just, it's not that. It's say, what experience does putting all of our faith and all of our stake in finances, what experience does that create? Does that still resonate with us? Does it still feel like that's how we want to look at finances, where it is the marker point for almost everything? It is the thing that perhaps hold back innovation, that stops specific ideas that come because they're not financially viable, right? So the fact that this is affecting people financially is both frustrating, because it says, well, shit, I'm now feeling like my survival is at stake here. And it's harming people. You hear a lot of people say it's harming people financially. It's making it so they can't put food on their table. It is. That is happening. People's daily lives is being affected financially. Is that how we want to live as a society, where everything is, people can't even be fed because we have a financial system that's being targeted here through a pandemic, and now we look at it as, well, the elites are evil for making it so these people can't be fed. Well, hold on a second. We're all playing into this story. As much as the elite might have an agenda at times that, is unique in every vertical that we want to talk about. It's not like, they control every single action that happens on the planet. But we're still playing into this. We're still agreeing to these paradigms. And much of the way we think is actually upholding it. But the more of us that are not thinking this way, the more you're seeing a crumbling of the institutions, right? The more the institutions actually eat themselves, because that's what they're designed to do, the more they start to crumble. And the more it gives us the opening, the opportunity to question and to say, is this what we really want? Do we really want to experience this? Because if not, perhaps it's not so much waiting for another group to tell us what to do, i.e., the Great Reset, presenting an idea, hey, this is what you got to do, and the billionaires are going to decide for you. Perhaps we do what, we're going to be releasing the Collective Evolution Institute pretty soon, which is really going to be looking at how we collectively co-create visions for new society, new societal design, new societal ways of going about things, right? Looking at crowdsourcing what it is that we want and what we want to experience, and challenging each other to really dig deep within themselves. Hey, what do we want our world to look like, right? In all these different verticals that make up the needs of society, how can we create something that approaches things from a completely different worldview? That's the essence of the institute that's going to be coming out soon. But I hope that answered the question, because I know, again, it was a long question, very good question, and the answer was a little bit complex, but I hope it was kind of the general essence was there. And if you have any like thoughts or retorts or critique or anything like that, I'm always open for it. Next question here, it comes from Alex. In regards to the repo market meltdown on September 2019 and the need for money printing, couldn't that also be a reason behind the creation of the COVID-19 fiasco? What is your opinion on that? So my expertise is not necessarily in, the fine workings of, economies and all that sort of stuff, but the simple way of looking at what the repo market meltdown really was you have a process that goes on within the economy where there's this overnight buying and selling of treasuries for cash. It helps people that have a lot of cash, move cash and use that cash to make little amounts of interest overnight, and it helps provide short-term cash liquidity and lending to institutions that need it. This happens a lot with banks. A lot of it plays through the Federal Reserve. And so what you really saw there was when you had the meltdown in September 2019, what it was saying was that there just wasn't any cash left within the Fed. So what that essentially says is there's a position that's going on within our economy right now where it's like we've talked about for so many years. You saw it back in 2008. What we're seeing in the very basis of how our economy functions is it's not sustainable, right? You're having these institutions that have no way of keeping up with the way our economy functions from a debt-based perspective. So money comes into our systems based on having debt attached to it. And what ends up happening with that is everyone's always having to owe and loan, and basically there's a private entity that's always having to collect interest on money that doesn't even exist, because in order to pay the interest, you got to have more money, you got to keep printing more money. So what ends up happening is when that system starts to eat itself on a big enough scale, you start to have a lack of cash available. So then what ends up happening is you have to print more money and push it into the system, which then devalues all the existing money in the system. Simplest way to look at it, because even myself, I'm not an expert on a lot of this stuff. This is not my focus, but that's up to what I do know about it. And for some people that are really not in the mind space of like really understanding the way the economy functions, easiest way to look at this is just we're in a time where our financial system's eating itself, and it's literally being propped up and held up by devaluing everybody's current position in the marketplace, meaning devaluing money in order to protect the banks, in order to hold up the system. So you have an entire financial system that is designed and is ready to collapse, and yet people just aren't ready to do that. So they just keep kind of holding it up by injecting more cash. So what that does and what that states and how it relates to the question is, if this is going on and this collapse would have a huge impact on our society as a whole, people losing jobs, people not being able to buy food, not even be able to run production lines, like you would basically collapse so much of the day-to-day workings of society. And if you had leaders that didn't want to tell the public that this was going on because it would be scary or because it would show that there's complete instability, would they create a COVID-19 like situation where they're using the virus to essentially say, we're having a complete meltdown of our economy? So they're blaming it on that versus blaming it on, or versus saying that, hey, our entire system is actually at extreme risk of falling apart when we have, well, I shouldn't even say when we have a pandemic, just in general, it's at extreme risk of falling apart because it is designed to eat itself. It can't keep going like this, right? So is the COVID-19 pandemic being used to sort of hide that fact that this whole financial system was about to fall apart? Perhaps, right? Because so much of what's being talked about now by world leaders is, well, we need somewhat of a financial reset. So they don't know how to fix this problem. And it's a problem that needs to be fixed. And instead of saying, well, how do we transition out of that into a world where we can thrive? They're saying, well, we still need to maintain all of our control and the way the structures are and the way everything is, and billionaires still want to hold the power that they hold. So how do we do some sort of a reset that makes it look like we're helping everybody in the process, right? That seems to be like what's playing out, right? You have this great reset that says we need to address this glaring issue, and here's how it's going to look, and here's what's going to happen, and we're going to use all the buzzwords. We're going to take care of the environment. We're going to make it so that everybody has food, everybody has water. We're going to introduce a UBI. We're going to do all these things that make it seem like, hey, we're going to make a better world. Maybe that's what they think, but I highly doubt it. What I think they're thinking is, let's take a situation that we don't want to admit to, right? That's going on within our financial markets, and maintain all the control and all the top-down authoritarian control, which is obviously the ideology of what's going on within powerful people, right? Top-down control. And let's present a solution that maintains top-down control, centralizes even more power, right? And if you look at the Great Reset, if you look at a lot of what's being presented as solutions, a lot of it is more top-down control. So my thoughts on this, again, not being a super duper expert in economics, is to say that I think it's very possible. I feel like this is not entirely about a virus, if about a virus at all, what we're seeing with COVID, right? I think there is a virus. I think some people are getting sick and some people are dying. I don't think it's as crazy as we're making it out to be on a mainstream level, but I do think that something is going on there. I think the existence of that is very much being used. Whether it was created for this or whether it's being used for this doesn't matter. Point is in our current moment, it's being used as a means to discuss how we need to rejig our society, which is actually a very important conversation we do need to have. The question is who's going to tell us how that society should be rejigged and what it should look like? Powerful billionaires, or really sourcing from the people what the people want? Are these powerful billionaires and politicians working on behalf of the people, or are they working on behalf of their own interests? This is part of the wake-up call that's going on. This is part of the breaking of the illusion, losing faith in the institutions that is necessary. In realizing that political interests, most of the time, especially at federal levels, so countrywide levels, are not acting in the interest of people. And this is a huge wake-up call that requires a change in our worldview. That can be scary for a lot of people, right? Which is why it's important to know how to present this information in a way that is not, hey, this is just one giant conspiracy theory and those people just push away that information. No, this is crazy. But really asking deeper questions, really exploring the stuff from a standpoint that says, yeah, I know it's going to be scary to look at this because it's going to crash out your worldview, but we got to address this. Is this really acting on behalf of people's interests? Is this really what we want? Or are we just sitting back waiting for politicians, for other people to just tell us how our lives should be run? Right? This is the process we got to get engaged within. But anywho, I feel like that was probably the weakest response I could have provided there of all the three questions, but I wanted to try and address it anyway because I think it is an important question. Yeah, if you have any questions for next week, by all means, throw it down in the comments and we can dive into it. And thanks so much for checking in. Once again, if you want to check out any of the courses or anything like that we mentioned earlier on in this, CETV.1 was what you can visit to sign up becoming a member to become a member of CETV. We're kind of in this process of looking at whether or not we're even going to continue with a YouTube channel. We're as a company kind of looking at how to move away from a lot of the infrastructures that exist out there, Facebook, Instagram or YouTube, that take a lot of our energy, but that are really not providing us anymore with sustenance, really. Most of the time on YouTube, we can't get our message out there, even though we have over 100,000 subscribers. It doesn't really go anywhere. Facebook, same sort of situation. None of these organizations pay us anymore. I think we get maybe a couple $100 from YouTube, but like half our content, can't have advertising anyway. So we're kind of in this position as a company where the reality is, it's like, you want to continue, you need to be supported by people. So we're kind of looking at building more of our own platforms that, and we might just burn the ships. We might just say, hey, no more YouTube, no more any of this stuff, because it's making it so that we can't even survive as a company in the same way, because we have to put so much energy into stuff that doesn't keep us going. So we're looking at a lot of these things right now, but I just wanted to throw that out there as it's a reality of the sitch right now. It's just how she rolls. But that's it. That's all. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.